Hi guys, Bobid here, back with another video. I know it's been a while, but today I want to talk to you guys about Tokon and why I think it's one of the smartest fighting games I've played in a while. And it's not because it's doing anything completely new, rather Arxis have taken mechanics that we are used to and have quietly changed the rules. Now these changes could completely reshape how beginners and veterans play the game. So today I'm breaking down 5 mechanics that make Tokon feel unlike any other fighter. So let's get into it. Let's start with Gatlings. This is probably a controversial mechanic. If you're new to fighting games, Gatlings are simply the ability to chain one normal attack into another. In most of the anime fights I've played, you can chain around 5 or even 6 before having to cancel into a special. But in Marvel Tokon, Arxis has capped it at 4. Now a lot of people aren't happy about this, and honestly I do get it. I do prefer myself longer Gatlings, but the game is not even out yet, so I'm not ready to call it a bad system. So the question is, why would Arxis make this change? There isn't an obvious answer why Arxis have chosen to go down this route, but if I was to guess, it will be due to shorter block strings and shorter combos. But I think they are trying to narrow the gap between beginners and veterans, or at least try find a compromise. If you think back to when you first started playing fighting games, the longer someone pressured you, the more tempting it was to mash a button and hope for the best. Learning when it's actually your turn takes time. With the 4 Gatling rule, it shortens pressure and it gives beginners more opportunity to recognize these moments instead of feeling trapped. One of the first things every player learns is a basic block string, especially in these sort of tag anime fighters. When that string finally lands, most beginners just finish it because that's the sequence they've practiced over and over. An experienced player, however, will confirm the hit early and switch into a more damaging combo. With a 4-hit Gatling limit, beginners have less filler before the real combo starts, so that gives them a little more room to extend their damage without having to master hit confirm straight away. It's a small change, but it feels like another example of Arxis making the game easier to pick up without taking away the depth that the veteran players enjoy. Now I will caveat this by saying if Arxis were to change the Gatling rule to 5 or 6, I don't think it will make too much of a difference. But seeing that the game is just round the corner, I would prefer they just left it as is and maybe make the change later down. Now this does sort of segue to the second point, which is Marvel Tokon's combo limit system. Now we've already seen some crazy long combos in this game, but realistically beginners probably aren't going to be running into those optimized routes straight away. What you're more likely to see is someone using assist, auto combos, basic conversions to extend their damage, and that's where the combo limit comes in. Instead of sitting there watching a 20-second combo you can't do anything about, you'll eventually be forced back into neutral. Or if your combo keeps dropping because you're hitting the limit, it pushes you to actually learn better routes. Now here's what's quite interesting about the combo limit system. It doesn't just affect beginners, it also affects experienced players. I mained Green Goblin in the open beta and I learnt my combo routes with light starters. However, if I was to start my combo with a medium, I would not get the ender that I needed. For Green Goblin specifically, the goal was to end your combo with the combo limit, and when it popped, you usually transition into a bomb setup. But like I mentioned before, depending what starter I started with, whether it was a medium, heavy or light, the combo wouldn't end with the combo limit explosion. And that's what makes this system interesting. It doesn't just shorten combos, it forces both new and experienced players to think about their decisions after every hit. It does seem like we're going to have to learn multiple BMBs for each character. If you start with a light, it's a certain route. If you start with a medium, it's another one, and so on and so on. Now, I know there's been a fair few complaints about the combo limit system, but honestly, after seeing the open beta and the clips on Twitter, I'm not too worried about the combo system in this game. If anything, they're really fun to execute, and the more I see, the more I want to play this game. I think the main takeaway is the fact that beginners get a visual cue of when the combo is about to end because they'd have a combo limit bar that's about to pop. And that might just feed them a bit more patience while playing the fighting game because they can see, oh, I'm about to pop out this combo, I can get back into neutral and play the game. Now this moves us on to the third point, and that's mix-ups. One of the weirdest conversations online around this game was people saying that this game wouldn't have any real mix, and honestly I'm not sure why people thought this. I can understand maybe from the first 2 closed betas, but it was quite clear. I mean, it was pretty clear to me that a lot of characters had built-in mix-up tools. And when you combine that with assist, obviously there's potential with the game. I mean, you've got characters like Danger with orb setups. You've got Doctor Doom, he's got lasers and, like a dash which goes through you. Star-Lord's freeze gun resets. So you can already see the game had plenty of ways to mix someone up. Now, these mix-ups weren't as ridiculous as something as, say, 2KO. But I don't think that should be the standard. Every interaction doesn't necessarily need to be unreactable 50-50 to make the game fun and exciting. And I think that's the key takeaway is this game fun and exciting to play? And so far it is. Now, we've obviously seen what Wawa has done with Magic and also what SQ has discovered with the tag system. So it's quite obvious that the depth is there. The game might not start with completely broken mix, but I do think once players spend more time labbing, it's going to get a lot more crazier. One interesting thing to mention is that jumping lights aren't actually overheads in Marvel Tokon, and I think that's quite an intentional decision from Arxis. They didn't want every jump in to become a three-way guess where beginners are constantly forced to gamble between high, low or throw. Instead, the game's trying to find a middle ground. Beginners get a bit more opportunity to breathe while experienced players still have the tools to create strong mix-up. They just have to work a bit harder to set them up. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if this system gets pushed to its limits in a few months, and once players fully understand the characters, we might see some setups that force Arxis to revisit some of these decisions that they've made with the game and its mix-ups. Now let's talk about the fourth mechanic in Marvel Tokon, which I think makes the game really interesting, probably the most important mechanic, and that's the assist and tag system of the game. Honestly, it's a little weird. The assist definitely feels better than the previous build of the game that I played, but Arxis have added a lot of restrictions around how and when you can use them. For example, you can't whiff a move and immediately call an assist to cover yourself, or to even bait your opponent into whiff punishing you and they instead get punished by your assist. You can't freely call assist during block strings unless there's a gap, I believe, or the opponent's no longer in block stun. These restrictions, I think maybe Arxis were thinking that they don't want beginners to be stuck in endless true block strings where they don't even get a chance to play the game. For experienced players, this does make the game feel a bit unnatural. It doesn't respond the way you expect it, and naturally that makes the tag system feel less flexible. The assists themselves are also designed around specific roles. Assist 1 is your projectile assist. Assist 2 is your sort of anti-air / DP type assist, and assist 3 is usually your strongest assist, and that's very character specific and quite unique. You also have aerial and combo conversion assist. They're a lot more standardized across the roster, so it does feel like Arxis are trying to homogenize the way the assist works outside of assist 3, and that's quite an interesting approach to the mechanic. Again, I think it's bridging the gap between beginners and veterans. The clear rules with the tag and assist system makes it not that intimidating to approach. You sort of know what you're going to get. Whereas there's just about enough leeway for veterans to be creative somewhat and not feel restricted and have fun with the game. Now, let's talk about the wacky part of this game that was recently discovered by SQ, and that is the tag mechanic. I have a feeling that this technique will become a huge part of the meta, if not initially when the game is released. The idea is basically you raw tag and you input a special just before the character swap finishes, and the result is your point character effectively becomes your assist character, and you can also choose what special you want. Now, this does open up a lot of possibilities for mix-ups and pressure, and honestly it looks like the exact type of thing that veteran players are going to experiment with. Whether this is an intentional mechanic that Arxis implemented or is something they're going to look at later down remains to be seen, but it shows that there's still a lot of depth hidden within the game and the system, and that's good to know. And before we move on from this point, we should talk about the assemble gauge. At first glance, you'd think assists are limited because one assist consumes a pip from your assemble gauge. And since you have 3 pips, you assume you can only have 3 assists before running out, but that's not exactly how it works. Turns out calling assist in neutral doesn't drain the gauge, and instead it just puts the assist on like a small cooldown, which is very different from other tag fighters. You could also trick the game into thinking you're in neutral during combos, and there's been examples shown where people have comboed someone and called an assist and the gauge wasn't depleted from it. I do think this might be one of the decisions that will pose a problem for the future of the game. I can already see neutral becoming less about interaction with your opponent and more about jumping around, throwing out assists and waiting for someone to finally get clipped. With that being said, overall it's a good start for the tag system. They probably will balance it or adjust it as the game develops. Now let's discuss the defensive options, and this is probably the area where I have mixed feelings. Arx has clearly put in a few defensive tools to help players escape pressure, but the question is whether these mechanics will stay strong once players fully understand how to counter them. First, let's discuss crossover reflect. This is basically the counter that forces the opponent away from you. The screen sort of changes color and then the assist character comes out and kicks you off the opponent. Funny enough, if you react quickly enough, you can actually counter it. If you get the perfect timing, you can disassemble the opponent for 10 seconds, and that basically just means that they can't use their assist. If you don't perfect counter them, then you at least deny their counter attempt. I think over time people will start reacting to this instinctively and it will become somewhat of a useless mechanic. That being said, it does have a strong case to be used during zoning. For some reason, if you block a projectile and do a crossover reflect and your opponent perfectly counters it, you don't actually get disassembled. It's quite safe to use against full screen zoners. So next is assemble counter, which is the closest thing to, I'd say, a drive reversal or a V-shift. It basically is your character stepping back with an orange after image, and if the opponent presses a button during that animation, they get countered. The main way around it seems to be baiting it and then punishing the recovery, or calling an assist, activating it via the assist, and then blocking the follow-up yourself and then punishing the blocked follow-up. I think out of all the defensive options, this is probably going to be the most consistent one to be used with the most consistent result. I found myself getting hit by it a lot more than the crossover reflect during the open beta, so it'll be interesting to see how this mechanic develops. And finally we have assemble smash. Now this is a 2-in-1, but let's go through it. The grounded version is basically drive impact from Street Fighter 6 mixed with Guilty Gear's dust attack. It's got one hit of armor and throw invincibility, as well as being an overhead. If you have an assist available, you can actually lead it into a full combo. I could definitely see new players using this a lot to steal turns, blow through gaps in pressure, punish certain moves that only have one hit. But just like drive impact, it will be countered by experienced players, and there will be adaptations with people using their own assemble counter to punish it. The aerial version feels a lot like a budget super dash from Dragon Ball FighterZ. It doesn't go full screen, but it is completely invulnerable to projectiles, and it's a really strong tool to blow through zoning to force your way in. During the open beta, I saw a lot of players using this mechanic repeatedly, and this will definitely help beginners find their footing in the game and, escape certain situations that they usually couldn't. And I think this is a good spot to end the video on, which is Arxis are really trying to bridge this gap between beginner players and experienced players. And although all fighting game developers recently have been trying to tackle this, probably Street Fighter 6 came the closest. Although after people find out Drive Rush was pretty scrubby and then Perfect Parry added a element of randomness, it in a way failed. Tokon seems like it has a lot of promise. I'm really interested to see where this game goes and if it's successful in that intent. Of course, guys, if you want to see more Tokon content, I'll be releasing it, especially after the game comes out. Hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.